The snow was falling hard that Christmas Eve. The kind of snow that makes you want to stay inside, close to the fire, close to the people you love. But 16-year-old Marcus Williams wasn't inside. He was walking home from his shift at the grocery store. 3 miles. In the freezing cold.
Guess.
Because his car broke down 2 weeks ago and he couldn't afford to fix it. His hands were numb. His coat was thin. But he kept walking. That's when he saw her, an elderly white woman, lying face down in the snow, not moving. Marcus didn't hesitate. He ran to her, dropped to his knees, turned her over gently. Her lips were blue. Her eyes were barely open. "Help me," she whispered. "Please. Now here's what you need to understand. This wasn't just any woman. This was Margaret Thornton, the wealthiest woman in Ridgebrook County, a woman whose family had shaped this town for generations, a woman who had made decisions that affected Marcus's family in ways he couldn't even imagine. But Marcus didn't know any of that. All he saw was a human being who needed help. What happened next would change both of their lives forever. It would expose secrets buried for decades. It would challenge everything this town believed about itself. It would prove that sometimes the most powerful act of courage is simply choosing to care when the world tells you not to. This story has anger. It has heartbreak. It has injustice that will make your blood boil. It also has something else. Hope. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Marcus Williams grew up on the east side of Ridgebrook. If you know small towns, you know what that means. The east side was where the roads weren't paved as smooth, where the street lights took longer to get fixed, where families worked twice as hard for half as much. Marcus lived with his grandmother, Dorothy Williams. She raised him since he was 4 years old. After his mother passed away from an illness they caught too late because the nearest hospital was 40 minutes away. Dorothy was 71. She had arthritis in both hands. But she still worked part-time cleaning houses to help make ends meet. Marcus worked too. Every day after school, he walked to Henderson's grocery. He stocked shelves. He mopped floors. He carried bags to customers' cars with a smile, even when they didn't tip, even when they didn't say thank you. He was saving money for 2 things. First, to fix his car so his grandmother wouldn't have to take the bus in winter. Second, to apply to college. He wanted to be an engineer, build things, create things, make his grandmother proud. But money was tight, was always tight. Christmas was 3 days away, and Marcus had exactly $47 saved for presents. He'd already bought his grandmother a new pair of warm gloves, the kind with the soft lining. He wrapped them himself, even though the paper was crooked. That's the kind of young man Marcus was. Quiet, hardworking, full of love he didn't always know how to show. Now let me tell you about the other side of Ridgebrook, the west side. That's where the Thornton estate sat on 12 acres of perfect land. White columns, long driveway. It's the kind of house that made you slow down when you drove past, just to look. Margaret Thornton was 83 years old. Her husband, Richard, had passed away 5 years earlier. Her children lived far away, one in New York, one in London. They called on holidays sometimes. Margaret spent most of her days alone. She had money, more than she could ever spend. But she also had something else. Regret. The kind that keeps you awake at night. The kind that makes you replay moments from decades ago, wondering if you could have done things differently. See, the Thornton family had history in Ridgebrook. Not all of it was good. But just when Margaret thought life was hard enough, things took a darker turn. Started 3 days before Christmas Eve. Margaret's housekeeper, Rosa, had taken the week off to visit her family. Margaret insisted she go. "Family's everything," she told her. "Don't worry about me." But Margaret wasn't used to being completely alone. On the first night, she forgot to eat dinner. On the second night, she couldn't sleep. On the third day, she realized she was out of her heart medication. She should have called someone. Her doctor, a neighbor, anyone. But Margaret Thornton had spent her whole life not asking for help. Pride can be a dangerous thing. That evening, she decided to walk to the small pharmacy on Oak Street. It was only half a mile away. She'd walked it dozens of times before, but that was before the snow started falling. By the time Margaret was halfway there, the wind had picked up. The temperature had dropped. Her expensive wool coat wasn't enough. She felt dizzy. Her chest felt tight. Just a little further, she told herself. But her legs wouldn't cooperate. She stumbled once, caught herself on a fence post. stumbled again. This time, there was nothing to hold on to. She fell forward into the snow. The cold hit her face like a slap. She tried to push herself up, but her arms were shaking. Her heart was racing. Everything was spinning. "Help!" she tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper. She lay there for what felt like hours. It was probably only 15 minutes. But in the freezing cold, 15 minutes is a lifetime. She thought about her children. How long would it take them to find out? Would they come to her funeral? Would they even care? She thought about Richard, how she missed him, how she wished she'd told him she loved him more often. And then, strangely, she thought about a decision she'd made 40 years ago, a decision that haunted her still. Her eyes were closing when she heard footsteps, then a voice. Ma'am, can you hear me?" Strong hands turned her over gently. A young face appeared above her, brown skin, worried eyes, snowflakes catching in his hair. "I'm going to help you," the young man said. "You're going to be okay." Marcus didn't think. He just acted. He took off his thin jacket and wrapped it around her. Then he lifted her carefully, gently into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. "Where do you live?" he asked. She managed to point toward the west side. Marcus knew what that meant. That was a 2-mile walk in a snowstorm. Carrying an elderly woman, he didn't hesitate. He started walking. "Stay with me," he kept saying. "Keep your eyes open. Talk to me. What's your name?" she whispered. Marcus Williams." Something flickered in her eyes, just for a moment. Williams. She knew that name. "Just breathe," Marcus said. "We're almost there." He was lying. They weren't almost there. His arms were burning. His legs were screaming. The cold was cutting through his shirt like knives. But he kept walking, because that's what you do when someone needs you. By the time they reached the Thornton estate, Marcus could barely feel his hands. He carried her up the long driveway, up the porch steps, and through the front door that thankfully was unlocked. Inside, he laid her on the couch, found blankets, turned up the heat. Then he called 911. The paramedics arrived 20 minutes later. They checked Margaret's vitals, gave her oxygen, wrapped her in warming blankets. "You saved her life," one of them told Marcus. "Another 20 minutes out there, and we'd be telling a different story." Marcus just nodded. He was still shivering. But before the ambulance left, Margaret grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "Why did you help me?" Marcus looked at her like it was the strangest question in the world. "Because you needed help. That was it. That was his whole reason." She started crying then, not soft tears. Deep, heavy sobs that shook her whole body. Marcus didn't understand why, but if you think that was heartbreaking, wait until you see what came next. Margaret spent 2 days in the hospital. Minor hypothermia, irregular heartbeat, exhaustion. But something else was happening inside her, something the doctors couldn't see. She couldn't stop thinking about Marcus Williams. Williams, that name haunted her. It brought back memories she'd spent 40 years trying to bury. When she got home, she made a phone call. "I need you to find out everything about a young man named Marcus Williams," she told her lawyer. "He lives on the east side, somewhere on Maple Street." Within hours, she had the information, and that's when her heart truly broke. Marcus Williams was the grandson of Dorothy Williams. Dorothy Williams was the daughter of James Carter, the man whose life Margaret Thornton destroyed in 1983. Let me explain. Back then, Margaret's husband Richard was running for state senate. The Thorntons were building their empire: real estate, investments, political connections. James Carter was a groundskeeper who worked on their estate. He was black, he was quiet, he was good at his job. But someone accused him of stealing from the Thornton household. Margaret knew James didn't steal anything. She knew it in her heart. She'd seen the real thief, a white contractor who'd been doing work on the house. But Richard told her to stay quiet. "If we defend him, people will talk," Richard said. "It'll hurt the campaign. Just let it go. Find another job." He didn't find another job. Once the accusations spread, no one in Ridgebrook would hire James Carter. His reputation was destroyed. His family suffered. He died 10 years later, broken and poor. Margaret said nothing. For 40 years, she carried that guilt. She told herself she couldn't have changed anything. She told herself it was Richard's decision, not hers. She could have spoken up. She had the power. She had the name. She chose her comfort over a man's life. And now, 4 decades later, that man's great-grandson had saved her life. Without knowing, without expecting anything. Just because she needed help. Margaret sat in her empty mansion and cried for hours. How could she ever make this right? The next day, she asked her driver to take her to Maple Street. Dorothy Williams opened the door slowly. Her eyes narrowed when she saw who was standing there. "Mrs. Thornton," she said flatly. "What do you want?" "I came to thank Marcus. He's not home." There was no warmth in Dorothy's voice, no hospitality, just cold truth. "May I come in?" Margaret asked. Dorothy didn't move for a long moment. Finally, she stepped aside. The house was small, clean but worn. There were family photos on every wall. Photos of children, grandchildren, generations of Williams and Carters. And there, in the corner, was an old black and white photograph. James Carter. Margaret's knees nearly gave out. "That's my father," Dorothy said quietly. "He died when I was 25. I know who he is." The words hung in the air like ice. Dorothy's eyes filled with something, not quite anger, not quite sorrow, something deeper. "Then why are you here, Mrs. Thornton?" Margaret took a breath. "Because I need to confess something. I need to make it right." She told Dorothy everything. The theft accusation. The contractor who actually stole. Richard's orders to stay quiet. Her 40 years of cowardice. When she finished, Dorothy was silent. Then she spoke. "Do you know what my father told me before he died?" Margaret shook her head, said, "Baby girl, don't let bitterness eat your soul. The truth always comes out eventually. And forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you." Tears streamed down Dorothy's face. "I've carried anger toward your family my whole life. Watched my children grow up poor because my father couldn't get work. Watched Marcus's mother die because we couldn't afford proper health care fast enough." She paused. "But my grandson saved your life. Without hate, without hesitation, because that's how I raised him." Margaret couldn't speak. "So I have to ask myself," Dorothy continued, "if Marcus can show that kind of grace, what excuse do I have? Just when it seemed all hope was lost, something incredible happened. Marcus came home an hour later, found his grandmother sitting at the kitchen table with Margaret Thornton. Both women had red eyes. Both women looked exhausted. "What's going on?" he asked slowly. Dorothy smiled softly. "Sit down, baby. There's something you need to hear." For the next hour, Margaret told Marcus the truth. About his great-grandfather James. About the false accusation. About her silence and its consequences. She told him about the generations of struggle her cowardice had caused. And then she did something no one expected. She apologized. Not the kind of apology that's really an excuse. Not the kind that says, "I'm sorry you feel that way." A real apology. "I was wrong," Margaret said. "I was a coward. And my silence helped destroy your great-grandfather's life. Now, nothing I say or do can fix that, but I'm here to try." Marcus listened in silence. When she finished, he asked one question. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you saved my life," Margaret said. "And I need you to understand what that means. A Williams saved a Thornton. After everything my family did to yours, you showed me more humanity in one moment than I showed your family in 40 years. Marcus looked at his grandmother. Dorothy nodded slowly. "What do you want to do with this information, baby?" Marcus thought for a long time. Then he said something that changed everything. "Mrs. Thornton, I didn't help you because I wanted anything. I helped you because you were dying in the snow. That's it. That's the whole reason." He paused. "But now that I know the truth, I think you should tell everyone." Margaret's face went pale. "What do you mean, tell the town?" "Tell everybody what happened to my great-grandfather. Clear his name. Let people know who he really was." "Marcus," Dorothy started. "No, Grandma. This isn't about money. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth." He looked at Margaret. "My great-grandfather died with people thinking he was a thief. His grandchildren grew up with that shame. My mom grew up with that shame. Don't you think he deserves better than that?" Margaret was silent. This wasn't what she expected. She thought Marcus would want money. A settlement. Something she could write a check for and be done with. But he wanted something much harder. He wanted the truth. 3 days later, on New Year's Day, Margaret Thornton published a letter in the Ridgebrook Chronicle. She told everything. She named the real thief Thomas Pritchard, the contractor who died 15 years earlier. She explained how she stayed silent to protect her husband's political career. She apologized publicly to the Carter and Williams families. She announced the creation of the James Carter Memorial Scholarship Fund, a full-ride scholarship for any student from the east side of Ridgebrook who wanted to go to college. Marcus would be the first recipient. The town was shocked. Some people praised Margaret's courage. Others called it too little too late. Some didn't believe her at all. But for the Williams family, it meant something much simpler. Finally, someone told the truth. Dorothy framed the newspaper article and hung it next to her father's photograph. "He knows," she whispered. "Wherever he is, he knows." So what does all this mean for us today? This story isn't just about Marcus and Margaret. It's about all of us. It's about the choices we make when no one is watching. It's about the courage it takes to do the right thing, and the damage we cause when we do on. Think about Margaret's silence. She didn't fire James Carter. She didn't make the accusation. In her mind, she wasn't the villain. But silence has power. When we see injustice and say nothing, we become part of it. When we protect our comfort at the cost of someone else's dignity, we pay a price even if it takes 40 years to collect. And think about Marcus, 16-year-old boy, walking home in the freezing cold. Barely enough money to fix his car, every reason in the world to just keep walking. He saw a human being who needed help, and he helped. No calculation, no hesitation, just action. That's the kind of person his grandmother raised him to be. That's the legacy of Dorothy Williams. That's the spirit of James Carter, passed down through generations despite everything the world threw at them. Here's what this story teaches us. Hurt doesn't have to pass from generation to generation forever. Yes, James Carter was wronged. Yes, that wrong had consequences that echoed through decades. Yes, the Williams family suffered because one woman chose silence. But Marcus broke the cycle, not with anger, not with revenge, with something much more powerful: grace. He showed grace to a stranger who didn't deserve it. In doing so, he created the possibility for healing. That's not weakness, that's strength. The hardest thing in the world isn't hitting back. It's choosing not to land, still standing tall. Now, I want you to think about something. We all have Margaret moments. Maybe not this dramatic. Maybe not with these exact consequences. But moments where we could speak up and don't. Moments where we see something wrong and look away. Moments where we choose comfort over courage. This story asks us, what truths are we sitting on? What confessions are we too scared to make? What cycles could we break if we just found the courage to be honest? And it asks us something else too. When we see someone struggling, someone different from us, someone we don't know, do we help? Do we keep walking? Marcus Williams couldn't afford a working car, couldn't afford a warm coat. He had every excuse to be bitter at the world. But he wasn't, because his grandmother taught him that your circumstances don't define your character. Your choices do. Before we wrap up, there's one final truth you need to hear. 6 months after that Christmas Eve, Marcus Williams graduated from Ridgebrook High School. He was valedictorian. When he walked across that stage, the whole auditorium stood up. His grandmother was in the front row, crying happy tears, wearing the gloves he'd given her for Christmas. And in the back row, sitting quietly, was Margaret Thornton. After the ceremony, she found Marcus in the parking lot. "I have something for you," she said. She handed him an envelope. Inside was a photograph, black and white. A young man in work clothes, standing proudly in front of a garden he'd built. James Carter, age 25. 1 year before the accusation. "I found it in our family archives," Margaret said. "He built the garden at our estate. It was beautiful. Your mother talked about it until the day she died." She paused. "I thought your grandmother should have it." Marcus looked at the photograph for a long time. "Why did you keep this?" he asked. Margaret's voice broke. "Because even then I knew he was a good man. I was too weak to say so." Marcus nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He hugged her. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one. The kind that says, "I see you. I forgive you. Let's move forward." Margaret sobbed in that parking lot like she hadn't sobbed in years. Here's the final piece of this story. That September, Marcus started college. Engineering program. Full scholarship, the one Margaret created in James Carter's name. But he wasn't alone. Dorothy Williams moved into a small apartment near campus. She wanted to be close to her grandson. Margaret helped pay for the move. Every Sunday, the three of them had dinner together, a black grandmother, her grandson, and the elderly white woman who'd wronged their family 40 years ago. It wasn't easy. There were awkward silences. There were hard conversations. There were days when old pain bubbled up and forgiveness felt impossible. But they kept showing up. Because that's what healing looks like. It's not a single moment. It's not a dramatic speech. It's choosing day after day to sit at the same table with people who hurt you and people you hurt and trying to build something new. Last Christmas Eve one year after Marcus found Margaret in the snow door, he passed away in her sleep. She went peacefully, with her grandson holding her hand. At her funeral, Marcus read a passage she'd marked in her Bible. It was about forgiveness, about not letting bitterness poison your heart, about the courage it takes to love people who don't deserve it. Margaret Thornton sat in the second row and cried quietly. After the service, Marcus gave her the photograph of James Carter. "She would want you to have this," he said, "to remember what forgiveness looks like." Margaret held that photograph like it was the most precious thing in the world, because it was. So here's my question for you. What would you have done? If you were Marcus, would you have helped a stranger in the snow? If you were Margaret, would you have found the courage to confess after 40 years? If you were Dorothy, could you have forgiven the family that destroyed your father? There are no easy answers. But there's something we can all hold on to. Every day, we get to choose who we want to be. We get to choose whether we walk past someone who needs help or stop and lift them up. We get to choose whether we protect our comfort or speak the truth. We get to choose whether we pass down anger and pain or break the cycle with grace. Marcus Williams made his choice on a frozen Christmas Eve. He chose compassion, and in doing so, he didn't just save an old woman's life. He saved 2 families. He healed a wound that had festered for decades. He showed an entire town what courage really looks like. Not loud, not dramatic. It's a 16-year-old boy taking off his thin jacket in a snowstorm and wrapping it around a stranger. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply care. Remember his name, Marcus Williams? The boy who saved a life he didn't know was connected to his own. The grandson who honored his grandmother's teachings when it mattered most. The young man who proved that our past doesn't have to define our future, but our choices always will. Because sometimes the hardest stories are the ones that heal us all.